Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first ever episode of In 15 with Rinchin, a show where top experts share their most practical wisdom with you in just 15 minutes. My name is Rinchin, and I'm going to be your host. It is only fitting that the first episode of In 15 with Rinchin begins with a very special guest. He is a software developer and a trainer at a bootcamp. He is spiritual seeker and a writer who is passionate about holding space for growth and transformation in others. His expertise in Kanban earned him the title of Kanban King on LinkedIn, and recently he has been writing topics about deeper and meaningful work on LinkedIn, and most of his thoughts have been gravitating in that direction. Our guest will share their absolute best, the most practical advice on leadership. And it is not just going to be about professional leadership. The topic is around the leadership in life. Please join me in welcoming JJ Vega to this conversation. JJ, welcome to Conversation in 15 with Rinchin.
Oh, I don't think I realized that this was the first episode. I'm incredibly honored to be the first guest. Wow.
It's
Thank you so much for
incredible to
having
have
me.
you as first guest. It's amazing to have you here.
Well, thank you so much. And yeah, thanks for the introduction. I think you nailed it better than I could have nailed it myself.
Thank you so much. JJ, the topic that you shared with us, leading from ego versus leading from selflessness, it sounds like a topic on leadership, but it sounds like not just leadership in business, but leadership in life.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because the idea of comparing leading from the ego from leading from selflessness, or I would actually say leading from the heart instead of leading from the
Yeah,
head, probably a
yeah.
simpler way for people to be able to connect those topics. The spirit of that is that there is no separation between these parts of our life. And that if we're able to lead from a place of integration and wholeness, then you aren't just leading in business. You're not just making business the only container where leadership happens. Leadership can happen in any container, in any part of your life, quite naturally and spontaneously. So that's definitely the spirit of it, is, not making these false distinctions between these parts of ourselves when really it's all this one undivided whole.
That's true. That's interesting. I like that especially because just before we started recording, we were talking about having that distinction between how we present ourselves at work and what our true self looks like, and what we are, in authenticity. So what makes you gravitate towards these topics?
That's a good question that I don't know I'm ever going to have a satisfactory answer to. I think I've always been, I've always been a pretty deep and introspective person, just by temperament, by nature. I've been a voracious reader since I was very young. I ended up in circles of people and communities who were asking these types of questions, just kind of inquiring more deeply into the meaning of life. So very much an old soul since I was young. And at the same time, as I've always had these interests, I've always been, whether by choice or against my will, usually against my will, in some sort of a leadership position. So even from my first job when I was a 16-year-old kid, it pretty much immediately chucked me into a management role. And so my career has been defined by starting a job or starting a role or starting a skill set with the intention of just practicing that skill or just being in that role, and then ending up in some sort of leadership. And so really over the last couple of years, the interest in what we could call spiritual seeking and then the vocation of leadership have really started to intersect and then combine and express in a really beautiful way that's been transformative for me, and I hope it's been good for my teams as well. To have someone who's leading from a different place than trying to service their ego in the process.
Yeah, it gets me thinking about this whole concept on spirituality. So I connect a lot with that because to me, I'm a deeply spiritual person as well. And there's always
Hmm.
this question from others, especially people who may not come from that point of view. And they ask me that if you're so spiritual, why are you so interested in doing things that work so passionately, or why do you aim for, positions of leadership and everything? People like you should just go and be a hermit and, probably be found on some in a temple as a monk or something. But they don't
Sure. Yeah.
understand to some extent that spirituality is not just about withdrawing from the world, but it is about being in the world as your whole self that you are.
Yeah. That I'm getting goosebumps honestly right now because you nailed it. That's the whole thing. Um, in my experience, and especially when I have conversations with people about these topics, they have spirituality in a bucket that's over here,
Yeah.
and they have being a working professional, or what some cultures have called a householder, right? Someone that has a family, they have a house, they're involved in their community, they're working in some sort of profession, they have a career, and those are two separate things. And when I was in my 20s, I'm 37 now, when I was in my 20s, I very much had that separation, and I had the vision of like, okay, I'm just going to quit working, quit the grind, quit the tech world, and just go out, meditate in a cave. Won't life be awesome? And that just never really ever panned out because it removed this vital part of what I think a healthy spirituality is, which is complete and full engagement with the world.
Yeah.
The world does not need us to go off and be spiritual someone else. It needs us to wake up where we are and be a part of loving connection with other people. That's how teams transform. It's how cultures transform. It's how social systems transform, because people are awakening inside of those systems. So it comes back to this theme of like not creating these separate buckets, right? Not living from a place of separation, but living from a place of unity where all of it belongs. And even when that feels very paradoxical, to be
Yeah.
in that tension, it all still belongs, and we can be in loving engagement with what's happening right in front of us. And congratulations, you're a spiritual person now. You did it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's very thought-provoking. Um, and especially about those buckets and how we tend to compartmentalize everything. That's absolutely true. So, what is your one best advice that you're going to share today, or one practice that everyone can use to understand this realm a little better than how they do now, or maybe enhance, how they look at it and change their perception a little bit?
Yeah. So I have a practice. I'm going to use air quotes on this. And there's a practice, and then there's a mindset that I want to offer along with that practice. So the practice itself, and I'll make this as practical as possible, take 5 minutes first thing in the
Yeah.
morning after you wake up. If you typically wake up and get straight into your day, getting the kids up, doing all that stuff, maybe try to wake up half an hour early or something like that. Find a quiet space and do some form of a stillness practice. And I use the word stillness very intentionally. Stillness is an experience, and you could almost think of it like the canvas upon which our lives are painted. Like we're constantly surrounded and held within stillness. And most cultures respect and value stillness and silence as a medium through which the divine speaks to us. And so 5 minutes, it could be a breath meditation, it could be a mantra, it could be a prayer, whatever resonates. It doesn't matter what the exact form is. Whatever pulls you, as long as it's some connection with that stillness, take 5 minutes. and then move on. And that's like planting a seed, right? A lot of people hear that and they think 5 minutes, nothing can happen in 5 minutes. But it's not about adding another doing to your life. It's not about having to set aside 30 minutes to be rigid in the meditation practice. It's about, just the intention to be still and unconditionally with whatever is for 5 minutes. The mindset is moving a little bit away from the idea that this stillness, this spirituality that you're nurturing is separate from everything else. And how can that come into the way you lead? How can it come into the way you work? How can it come into the way that you relate to your spouse and your kids? Right? It becomes a different way of identifying with your own life. So 5 minutes of stillness in the morning, just plant the seed, and then start to maybe ask that question, how can I reduce a sense that this is something that's separate from everything else that I'm doing in my life? And watch what happens. Just be open to whatever comes from that, because often the results are quite surprising when we really lean into that.
Yeah, I think while a lot of people talk about mindfulness and that stillness, the second part that you just mentioned is something that a lot of us lose out aside on, which is how does this integrate with my life? And I think that's the biggest takeaway for me. I practice meditation every morning, but I never ask myself that question. And I think that this is something that I would definitely include in my practice moving forward. It's a very good question because what I do is a little opposite. I think that's my separate self. And now I'm entering into a different world after this. I'm stepping into a day which is completely different. But I think it's very important to create that link between both, like you mentioned. So that's a great advice. Thank you, JJ. But I'd like to know a little more, like how has this changed things for you?
Well, I know a lot of the people that are going to be listening and watching this are going to want to understand a little bit more how this could be impactful professionally. So I'm going to throw that out there, but really every part of my life has been impacted by a relationship with stillness. When I first was leading, so back when I was 16, when I started being placed in leadership roles, it was really about me. I mean, it was about everyone else, but it was about me. It was about me going home and feeling like, oh man, I was such a great leader. Man, I really led the heck out of that team. The team did so great, but even if I wasn't conscious of that voice, it really was about me. What has unfolded over time, leaning into stillness, leaning into this idea of wholeness versus separation, is the humbling recognition that I am merely a bit actor in the play of work that's happening. And my job, my role, is to facilitate what wants to happen, right? The bigger picture. It is not to enforce my will upon the proceedings. It's not to make it about me so I can feel good about myself as a leader. Truly, my goal is to disappear so that the team or the organization that I'm serving can thrive. And watching that happen, watching the people that I'm responsible for, who you could call my direct reports, start to grow and come up with ideas that I could have never come up with in a million years, and that become part of the shared collaboration, that's really been the most impactful thing. It's the art of not doing that has actually led to some of the most tremendous doings that I've had the privilege to be a part of. So professionally, it's changed the entire game. And oh, by the way, I'm way less stressed with work. I don't talk about how crazy it is at work and how busy I am all the time. And oh, it's so hard at work, because if it is hard, it's because I'm resisting what wants to happen and I'm no longer in service. I'm back into the ego. And when I notice that, okay, let's come back. And it's not to say that there aren't problems that appear or legitimate challenges, definitely not trying to undermine them. It's just my relationship with those challenges that's really changed. So it's amazing what stillness can do to shift that relationship when you just practice it over and over again through time.
Wow, that's incredible. The point that you mentioned about, serving versus, coming to coming to your work with a sense of service is another takeaway. So although this episode is about just one takeaway, for me, there are two today. So, because both are very practical and, something that you can apply right away next morning. So thank you, JJ, for taking time to share your invaluable insights today. I'm glad we started with a session on spirituality and how it integrates with what we call the real world, while everything together is a real world. And I think it's going to be a great learning for everyone who is seeking something wider than where they are at the moment.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been really a joy. And again, so honored to be the first guest of this. And I can't wait to see what other guests bring to the platform as well. I think it's going to be very enriching.
Absolutely. Thanks, JJ.
Thank you.